not coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I want to go higher, higher, higher than that.
Welcome back to the Business is Human podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, and we're here to bring you episodes that blend meaningful work with profitable success. Here to steward what I call the age of humanity. I believe if we transform the way we work, we can transform the way that we live. As always, my friendly request, if you like what you hear, hit subscribe so you don't miss any episode, and leave a review to tell the other humans that they might like it too. Always looking to help you and connect with others. All right, let's get into it, shall we? Welcome back to the show. Business is Human. This is Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, and we are just a few weeks away from the 6th annual Stand Tall in Your Story event. And I really hope that you already have a ticket and you're thinking about what you're going to wear and you're super excited. But if you don't, you probably still can. At the time of this recording, there are still tickets available, but we have sold out in the past. I do have a bigger venue this year at the Indiana Roof Ballroom, which is big and beautiful and gorgeous. And I have to sometimes just stop and pause and remind myself how far this event has come over the last 6 years. And I say that as a reminder to you who have big ideas in your heart that it's okay to just get started and let it be a little bit messy and uncertain. Because if I compare my headspace for year 1 to where I am with year 6, it doesn't even feel the same. And you just got to get started. Just get started and see where it goes, which really is a good segue into today's topic, which I'm going to call embracing surrender. How letting go can actually be the secret to success. What happens when the plan that you thought you were following takes an unexpected turn? And I am so happy to bring this topic to you because I've been trying to figure out a way to bring this conversation to the show. And I stumbled upon our guest today, Dr. Lisa Stanton, on Instagram, y'all. And she did a reel about surrender. And I was like, yes, that's what I want to talk about. And she's the one I want to talk to about it. And with this episode with Lisa, we're going to talk about what happens if you do surrender, truly. Open heart, open mind, open hand surrender. What if that is more of the key to growth in life and business? What if it's about faith and belief in something bigger than yourself? Because we are all either recovering from or in the throes of some control freak addiction, self included. I'm in the recovery mode, but I've been there. And it's not all it's cracked up to be, is it? So are we willing to try something different? So today I'm joined by Dr. Lisa Stanton, a powerhouse in both the world of psychology and spirituality. She has a PhD in social psychology and a background in behavioral research. Lisa had built what looked like the perfect career until everything changed. And so through this journey of sobriety, talk about release, that's the hardcore stuff that she had to go through, has taught her a lot about this. She's captured faith through that journey in a really meaningful way and a radical surrender. She found herself on a completely new path, get this, which has led her to a book deal, a thriving online platform, how I found her on Instagram, and now an unexpected return to the corporate world. But this time, Lisa is doing life on God's terms. So in this conversation, we're going to dive deep into the tension between striving and surrender, the identity and calling conversation, the unexpected ways that God works in our lives. And she'll talk a lot about from forgiveness and business to faith and career transitions. Lisa's story is going to challenge you to rethink what success really looks like. And maybe, just might be, invite you to surrender just a little more. Let's get into it.
So 2023, I was working at a full-time job in research. So my background is I have a PhD in psychology, but it's in social psychology, not in counseling. So I'm trained as a researcher. Like my doctoral minor was quantitative methods and statistics. So I was working at a health tech company in San Francisco, thought I had my dream job. I'm happy doing that. I'm getting sober, which is a whole other story about surrender. And as like part of this surrender process that I'm in, I started writing essays about spirituality. And that came out of sobriety for me because I didn't believe in God prior to getting sober.
Yeah, I saw that on your social. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Bible comes in then. These are all things we can circle back to. But when I think of that, like what it looks like to be successful in business and in life and surrendering to that, it was 2022 while I was working a full-time job. I started writing about spirituality. Then I started posting that on Instagram, and then that started growing. January 2023, I got laid off and very much thought that I had a problem that needed to be fixed, right? It's a control thing. Like my problem is I got laid off. Fixing it is I'm applying to new research jobs and everything's going to be great. And then instead of that, God basically showed me like, we're not applying to jobs right now through some stuff through him, through my husband is also a man of faith, him being like, hey, we were getting married in August. And he was like, maybe you should just take the time off until the wedding. So there's all these pieces coming together. Basically, as time goes on, it's very clear to me that I'm supposed to be spreading this message about God on Instagram. Then I got a book deal and I'm like, okay, God's calling me in this sort of like, I'm not really what you've seen in my work. It's not totally recovery based, but it's almost like spirituality, but for people who have come to it through suffering or people who have come to God, Jesus, Bible. When I say spirituality, I don't want people to think I'm like way off in some other realms, but coming to a relationship with God via that is often who finds me. So I think that I'm basically in the space of ministry, whatever that's. So since January of 2023, so just about 2 years, like full time, that's what I've been doing. And then but surrendered, always like, God, what do you want me to do next? God, what do you want me to do next? And then I have not even told anyone on Instagram or anything, like literally my family and husband know. But through a very odd series of events, I was on LinkedIn on Christmas Eve because my husband was very sick and we're just the two of us in our family at the moment. And my publisher from my book company had been like, you should be posting on LinkedIn. And I was like, I want to post about God on LinkedIn. Like, it's just a weird place to do it. I don't think it's whatever. It's all my own fears, right? Coming up in that moment, which I recognize. So it's Christmas Eve. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to see if there's pastors on LinkedIn and what they're posting and see if I can do this in a way that's not weird. So I go on LinkedIn and I still had job alerts on for the types of research roles I was looking at. And there was one that was there. And if you ask anyone in tech right now, it's not a good job industry. People are like, I applied to 400 jobs and I'm not getting any. Long story short, I see this job and I feel God be like, you should apply to that, which of course I ignore because I'm like, no, you have made me a minister and an author and I'm going in this other direction. And then it was just like on my mind to the point where I was like, fine, I'm redoing my resume. Like I added what I've done over the last couple of years, which is basically just like write a book, grow social media. Like this isn't even related to
just
research.
see yourself, and then if something happens, you'll know it was God because the credentials didn't add up.
Yeah. And basically I applied to this job. I signed a contract yesterday or Tuesday night. I signed a contract to go full time back into research. It's kind of an interesting timing because it was like a 6 rounds of interviewing because it's a pretty technical job. And it just like kept going. And I would like look at my husband, pray about it. And I'm like, I think I'm just supposed to keep doing this. And I don't really know why. But when you talked about that like intersection of business and surrender and all of these other things, it's like how those things come together in ways that I don't predict. And in a very like practical sense, in terms of like, what do I think success is? I was praying about like, I need an income eventually. Like, how do I sell more books? Do I go into social media branding? Do I do this different stuff? And God's like, what if you go back to, so it's a very similar role to the role that I had before. Hopefully my employer doesn't listen to this podcast because I'm about to tell you the cool part, but I'm making $50K more than I was when I left in 2023.
That's God in my experience. I didn't know it was coming. It came at the weirdest time, like on Christmas Eve, you're on LinkedIn. Hello, what? And, and then it just keeps rolling and you're like, well, I guess I'll just keep going. But
yeah.
And it's not instead of ministry or any of that other stuff, right? It's the income that you've been praying for.
Yeah. And the interesting thing I was going to say is it's at this point where like I post my sort of like cadence on social media as I put out this like preview on Thursday and then I post an essay every Saturday and I write those like pretty easily. Then God just like comes through them and I write them. That happens every week. And then the book just came out November 26th. I still have to do the book signings they tell me to do and all that stuff. But like it just sort of launched and now it can live a life of its own and I don't need to be doing that full time. So it all just like
It was time.
yeah, in ways that I could never plan. And I said that in my job interviews. They're like, why did you want this job? I was like, I'm not totally sure, honestly. I like really loved my old job and it was similar to this. I'm not even sure why I'm here. It does line up with a bunch of things I've been passionate about for a really long time. And my brother has diabetes and it's a diabetes related tech company. There was some logic to it, but I was like, I'm not really sure. I wasn't going to be like, I think God's calling me back to the office. But
even say, I'm not sure, you know, God's got to be in it if that's how you respond in an interview question, because so many companies want you to be just clamoring to join them. And you're like, I don't even know why.
Yeah. I told them I like didn't really apply to anything else. I was like, it's not like it's this or other things. And I'm actually trying to get a job right now. I just saw this and felt like I should apply to it.
Love. And to me, that's surrender. Like I got this feeling, then this happened. And when I think about my old life in corporate sales and what I call was striving, and the word strive actually means battle and conflict, where you always feel like you're in a battle to compete with others and achieve and produce, and living this way of surrender to what God has for you next is the most freedom I've ever felt in my life. And I have no idea what's coming next.
Yeah.
Which is a weird jump for many people in the business world to make. What do you mean surrender and you don't know what's coming next? That doesn't make any sense. And that's what I love most about it is the freedom to wake up and be like, if he redirects me today, okay, I guess that's what we'll do. And that's exactly what's happening for you.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because I feel like there is a prejudice a little bit, and it might just be because I spend too much time on social media because I've spent a lot of time on Instagram over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
And I will say that. My husband doesn't even have social media. So I feel like sometimes I'll say like, everyone's talking about this. And he's like, I literally have not met anyone talking about this. But it looks like God leads people sometimes like out of the mundane or out of a W-2 job or out of a whatever. So it was so funny to me that like my original story was like, I guess God wants me to be an author now or doing my own thing. And then it's also really funny that God doesn't always lead you to things that are overtly serving him or like overtly more freedom. Like I was like, God, we're going back into clinical research. Like, it's not like I'm doing some like terrible for the world thing or something.
Right.
It's just like, I'm going back into health research. I'm going to look at diabetes outcomes in a diabetes coaching program. I'm going to look at ways to help improve people's lives who are like depressed. Like it's in a helping people role still. But it's just so interesting that like, I am 100% sure that it was God calling me to this place. And I'm like, but calling me out of here and into here. But like you said, it was at exactly the right time so that I don't think anyone online is even going to notice that I have a 9 to 5 again, unless I tell them.
But isn't it true that we've been led to believe that we're this or we're that? And this is a hybrid of how is he going to use your gifts and talents in a collective way? Because I believe that we were sold this identity lie, which I believe came from the devil, that we're too strongly associated with our jobs, that our identity is too rooted in our title, our role, our paycheck, our granite countertops, our neighborhood, whatever it is, that's usually associated with career. And I think that was the easiest way to get us exhausted and burned out and competing with one another versus doing the real work of surrendering to who he says we are, which then allows him to use us in a variety of different ways. And to your point, oftentimes that surrender comes from a need for sobriety or I lost my job. In your case, you got the combo pack. It's some place where all of a sudden our identity doesn't make sense anymore for where we were and we don't know what to do. So we go to him. And so now that you've got more healing and now have written a book, 52 life-changing lessons you learned in recovery, you've written a book to share with others. Now he's like, okay, now I need you over here. Which is so beautiful because I think of your story and the way I lead some clients that are wanting a spiritual relationship in our business coaching is when they're not sure what to do, I say, well, let's go to fishes and loaves. What do you have? Well, I've
Mhm.
got this gift and talent in this area. I've got this interest in this. I've got this, whatever. What do you have? Because it's easy to look around and say, people will say, well, I don't have the right degree, or I don't have this, or I don't have that, or I didn't have this experience. And I'm like, okay, we could spend days looking at what you don't have, but what do you have? And then once you start to make your fishes and loaves list, then you're like, oh, he could do a lot with this. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's exactly what's happening with you. It's like, oh, I got more that I can do with you in this area that you thought you were done with.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up that identity thing because, like you said, whether it's society or whether it's even some of the systems that we function in, like when I think about my LinkedIn, I'm like, well, is my
What do I
banner going to
put?
be my company or is my banner going to be my book? And like,
Yes.
and then also who do I need approval from? And like, right, if my company says like, I mean, they might just have a rule that you like have to do that and then I just have to do that. But the identity of like, well, am I a clinical research scientist or am I a nonfiction author? And my
Yes.
LinkedIn can only have one as my current occupation. The other one's just gonna like I have to put one first and I have to put one second on there. And I think that's such an interesting right. And then I'm also like a wife and a friend and all of these other things that I can't put on my LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But just that, like, when you were talking about not just the loaves and fishes, but this feeling of like, do you think I should put my Instagram on private? Because what if they find my Instagram and then they're like, she talks about God, so she's not going to like contribute to our psychology? Because I mean, it's a behavioral psychology based intervention for diabetes. So I even like had fear about that. And then was like, nope, if I'm supposed to be going in this direction, I can leave everything as it is. I can be both of those two things at the same time. And that there's some way that God is working that I'm actually like supposed to be both of those two things at the same time in order to move something forward that only he knows. And I have no idea what that is.
The first book that I published, there's a section in there where I left my 20-year career with the Franklin Covey organization, which was a well-known brand in the circles that I was in. And I gave a 6-month notice. I had plenty of time to think about this, but all of a sudden that last day, I was sitting at my kitchen counter having a little bit of a pity party, even though I was the one who chose to leave. And I'm drinking a glass of wine. And I thought to myself, I don't even know how to introduce myself tomorrow. And how will I know if I'm good if I don't have number whatever on the sales report? And that's really what began the work that I'm doing now. Was I got to the point where I said, I know what my unique gifts and talents are, and that's why I was successful there. And those I took with me. Those are mine.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lord. The Lord gave me these gifts and talents. Now I get to choose to go use them elsewhere. But I had to work myself through that. It didn't come naturally, to your point. And then it was like, okay, well, do I just name the business and make business cards? And then what do I put on the thing? I don't have any experience. People are going to think I'm an idiot. Like, what am I? Yeah. It's a whole thing about identity.
Yeah. I just surrendered one interesting piece of identity to just like, I will know when the time comes and I don't have to figure it out today. So I have like about 30 scientific publications, like in academic journals from various stages of my former career before the last 2 years, and some book chapters and all kinds of things. And they're all in my maiden name. Literally, the last article came out right before I got married, even though I wasn't working there anymore. A lot of projects that I had started at the last company I was at, when they finished them, they just left me as an author on it. And the very last one came out all in my maiden name. I was like, oh, wow, look at this identity transition, because then all of my writing since then has been under Lisa.
Fresh.
Yeah, has been under Lisa Stanton. But then I was like, well, if I publish research articles again, can I do that as Lisa Stanton? Like, is that possible? I still don't know today. They tend to not care if you use whatever name you're using.
Right.
And I still have not made the decision it's going to be one of those things where I'm going to pray about it the first time it comes up. But like whether I'm going to have all of my academic research under my maiden name and then all of the ministry writing under my new name. It's so interesting that we even have to like wrestle with this thing instead of just being like, it's fine to be both of it all at the same time.
The place that the devil loves the playground is if he can get you to have confusion in your identity, it's far easier to get you to go to fear, which is exactly what you illustrated. You said, am I allowed to post about God on LinkedIn? Am I allowed to post about God on Instagram when I have this job? Like all of that is the devil working in the goodness of the Lord, because the Lord is clearly guiding you to be getting you to question where your identity really is. That's all very fascinating. My son and I, he's 27 as of this week, we're reading the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Have you read it?
I actually read it. My whole story of God and not God is interesting, but my dad actually read it to us when I was like 10, like as our good night story. It's a lot.
That's new. Okay, now I have to know. Like,
He read
I
us
have
like
to know
A
your
Tale
story.
of Two Cities and like all kinds of stuff when we were really young.
Like
So my
classic
dad,
literature.
yeah, my dad, when we were young though, was Christian, and we like went to church. My parents got divorced when I was 5 or so, but my mom still to this day doesn't believe in God and didn't back then. So it was kind of this like, he took us to church while she's an academic too, while she got some writing done. But it was never like a united front, even when they were married. And then they got divorced. And my mom maybe like 3 times took us to a Unitarian church. So like not really church. And then my dad for a while took us to weekly Christian church, but then he eventually, both families are actually ethnically Jewish. And so my dad has like over time reverted back to being Jewish. So I was Christian and then I wasn't at all. And then in my 20s, I was like all in on being Jewish, but like not the religious part, just like I was going to like the white parties with all you can eat sushi that they have for like young Jewish professionals in Minneapolis. So
it was the
but
club.
like,
you were in the club.
Yeah. I was in the club. I went on Birthright, that like free 10-day trip to Israel that you can get if you're partially Jewish. So I did like all of that stuff, but I was not praying by any means. I don't even think I thought God existed. I just thought being Jewish was like cool and fun.
Cool, fun, yeah.
And then basically spent the later part of my 20s nothing. And then finally end up circling all the way back, sort of like through universe and new age, finally into like Trinity by the time that I get sober in 2021. So
I love
but
that.
anyway,
You've been
you were
on a
telling a story
journey.
about I was like, you were telling a story about
Yeah.
the Screw Tape Letters.
Well, the Screw Tape Letters are a demon writing to his younger protege, teaching them how to divert people from God. And so when you read it, you can look around and know that that's really happening. And all of a sudden, it's not just a classic piece of literature. It's based on biblical truth, but it's told in such a way that it is just fascinating. And so my son and I have been talking about reading it forever. And so I got it for us for Christmas. He's in Nashville and I'm here in Indianapolis. And so every time he calls, he's like, what letter are you on? And then we talk about like where we see that showing up in the real world. And the majority of it is about if you can get someone to question their identity, they will almost immediately go to fear. And that's when you know that you got them.
That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And circles all the way back to this surrender thing of like, if I can just surrender my identity, my whole identity, if I can surrender the name I'm going to publish under, if I can surrender all of that, then I can just like keep living in God's plan. And like you're saying, keep living in like less resistance, more peace, regardless of what's going on, to the point where I'm like, I'm even recognizing my own biases. Like, I'm like, okay, well, now I'm going to be a researcher for a long time now. But it's like, God didn't say I need you to be a researcher for a long time. God said, I need you to take this job right now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But our mindset and our history in business is there should be longevity or you're not good at it. And so you immediately went to, okay, now this is what I'm doing. And who knows? You could be on a 6-week assignment. Who knows?
That is a really scary and excellent point. That is okay. And I get to pray about that as soon as I'm off this podcast to really surrender to whatever the plan is. I am okay with the plan.
Whenever I've done this, 2 things have happened. And they're in a bit of a juxtaposition. One thing that has happened is I feel more freedom and joy and peace than I maybe ever have in my entire life. At a time when I don't know or really care what's coming up next. I have a vision. He's given me a very clear vision, but it has a lot of mobility that could happen in it. It's so far from the achievement based. And then I'm going to go to this title and then I'm going to get this kind of client and then I'm going to do this thing. It's just so different than anything. I mean, I helped work on the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, which is all about strategy and execution and productivity. Listen, I had spreadsheets and plans for everything in my life. And so, one, I have more joy and freedom than I've ever had by not being so tied strictly to this plan. But the second thing that's a bit in a juxtaposition is that freaks people out. So I'm very interested in paying attention to how people respond to me not having a plan. And I get up and I have my list of things I'm going to do for my clients, and I show up for my keynotes, and I'm a good steward of the work that I have today. I'm not just, wake up every day and decide, am I going to work today or not? I work hard, but I don't feel tied to this. Like, if I don't achieve this thing, then I'm unworthy, or then I've failed. That's the difference. Yeah. But when I talk about that level of surrender, it makes people twitchy.
Yeah. I have a very non-business example, but life example of that. It's kind of two related things where I really freak people out a lot of the time. Some people are like, that's great. And other people are like, what were you thinking? So one of the first places where I feel like my sobriety date is January 4th, 2021. And that's the date where I like kneeled down in front of a cross in a church, and like obviously a lot of confession and a lot of other things. I don't want people to think I got like struck by lightning and everything was easy. There was a lot of work that came after that, but that was the day where I really said, Jesus, I'm going to follow you. And then began the reality of surrendering and confessing my past and all of that. But one of the first things that happened around that time was I met a guy who is now my husband, and like started praying about, you're not supposed to date in early sobriety, right? That's like a big no-no.
That's right.
So you're not supposed to date in early sobriety. We have a huge age gap, which I will reveal the extent of in a second. But it was like this thing of people around me were like, you're newly sober. You have this huge age gap. He has way more sobriety than you. What are you doing? Like this whole thing. And then it's become this whole second thing, because when people found out we like want to have kids, they're like, he's going to die. First, it was he's going to die so he's 33 years older than me. So when we met, we were 29 and 62. Now we're 33 and 66. And like it works. And if you met him, he's like, I actually did not realize the age gap was that big when we met. And then I finally found out how old he was. And I was like, oh gosh.
You were already hooked then.
I had to pray about the same thing that other people are having to like work through. So like to an extent, I do get it. But it's just such a funny thing, because if you are a person who plans things out, it's like we got married when we were 32 and 65. I can't even make the math. 32 and 65. And so people were like, well, he's going to die like any second, and it's unfair to your children if you make kids. And the weirdest thing happened. We were kind of in the stage of dating where I was like, okay, we're either going to like get engaged and do this, or I need to like stop. God introduced me to, I just was like meeting people left and right, which like, this sounds really sad, but it was like very God ordained, if that makes sense. And I was like, okay, I get it. You can like stop giving me examples. But a lot of young widows, like I was meeting women who were like 35 and their husband had died, like over and over and over. And I was like, okay, I get it. I'm not the one who decides how long people are supposed to be married for. You are. And like whenever I have major decisions, like when I was realizing I wasn't supposed to be working, when I was realizing I was supposed to be working, I have this pretty intense knowing that like this is God. But it makes other people uncomfortable when they're like, but this is what's going to happen if you marry someone who's that much older. And I'm like, what's going to happen if I don't? And what's going to happen if I marry someone younger? What's going to happen if whatever it is?
So feeling the need to feel like you're in control of things.
Yeah. So it's been interesting. But like when you were talking about other people being uncomfortable with letting go of having a plan, I like forget that we have an age gap most of the time. But then like other people, when I like say something about how old he is, they're like, what are you thinking? And you guys are having kids. I mean, we've had people be like, that is completely irresponsible. Like you should not be having kids because you're setting them up to just like be messed up. I'm like, kids with young parents get messed up all the time. So it's interesting.
And what's really interesting about people feeling the need to judge and have an opinion about your choices is there's this big move of talking about authenticity. That's the buzzword of the last few years. And so everybody wants their uniqueness. So I always say we're all unique down to our fingerprints. That's the way God intended it. Great. I love helping people discover their authenticity and their uniqueness and talents. Great. But the minute that someone shows that they're different than you, people just lose it. And I'm like, okay, you can't have it both ways. You can't be all about celebrating your authenticity and your uniqueness and then immediately go to judge somebody who's unique. Doing something different than you. Like, make it make sense. Especially if you've been on Instagram a lot lately. You know that. Like you read the comments on anybody that's doing anything bold and you're like, oh my word.
Yeah.
What's going on, people? Like when somebody does something different than you, all of a sudden people are the judge and jury. Like, oh.
Yeah. Anytime I post about our age gap, which is not very often, but like once, I don't know, probably like 3 times in the few years I've been on Instagram, 2 things happen. It goes viral because people start yelling at me about things, and I lose a bunch of followers because people are mad that my husband has an age gap. So it's like a catch-22 because I'm like, wow, a lot of new eyeballs like end up coming as a result of the video going viral. And then at the same time, I lose a bunch of followers because people get mad.
It's funny because I just had this memory. I posted on TikTok last year, and I don't do a lot on TikTok. It's mostly just whatever my random thoughts. I posted about a guy that I had dated was a lot younger than me. Same thing. The opinions were rampant, and some of them were like, "You go, girl," and other ones were like, "Oh my God, who do you think you are?" And it did. It went viral because everybody was fighting in the comments, and I was like, "Okay." See you next week when I come back on here and see what y'all decide my fate is.
Yeah. So it is a funny thing. I don't do it that often. And the first time I did it, I didn't even know, you know what I mean? It wasn't on purpose. I was just like, oh, do I delete this? Like people are responding a lot more strongly. But what's funny too is I can see, like sometimes when I see other age gap couples, especially when someone's entire content is about age gap, it can be like really creepy. So then like from that perspective, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, like if I'm getting associated with that, it's funny because I see both sides of it sometimes where I'm like, I guess I should say maybe my relationship with God has also allowed me to like have compassion for someone being in a place where that like does make them that uncomfortable. And like, okay, I like can see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's a nice grace of God because several years ago I would have just been like, these people.
Well, and that's what I always try to do in the comments is just be kind and curious. And sometimes I have to walk away and then come back to be kind and curious. But it's funny how easily you can disarm people just with kindness. They either delete their own comment and walk away, or all of a sudden you're having a real conversation, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Opinions.
I will say, even just as like it's been a lesson for me in general, I really don't like when people are proved wrong and then they delete it. I feel like we should be mature enough to just say I was wrong. But I think that those are some of the 3 hardest words for people in general, and maybe especially people in America, and especially maybe America right now, to just say like, hey, I was wrong.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder to me to also, my husband and I actually have a thing between us that is often said in a joking way, but it's not joking. We don't allow apologies to each other. You cannot say, I'm sorry to the other person. You must say that you were wrong and why. Because it's actually like a really different thing if something happens to just say, I'm sorry. Because when you really think about it, if I do something to you and then I say I'm sorry, what I'm really saying is like, I'm sad that you feel harmed or that I did harm you.
Yeah.
I'm sad that I harmed you. There is, especially early on, I would be like, I'm sorry. And he's like, I know you're sorry. You look sorry. I don't really care what your feelings are right now. Were you wrong or were you not wrong?
What,
So
can you not disagree and not be right or wrong? I'm fascinated by this.
I guess, well, maybe we don't disagree that often. It's usually something where I'm trying to think of an example. We really don't argue that much, but let's say he's like really late for something, or let me be the bad guy. Why do I have to make him the bad guy? So let's say I'm really late for something. It's not like I'm sorry. It's like I was wrong for not paying closer attention to time, or I was wrong for not respecting your time. So it's really getting to the heart of like, what was I wrong about? Not just, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. Which makes me want to know now more about these 52 life-changing lessons that you learned in recovery. Is that related in any way?
I've written an essay about it. It's sad to say I've written so much. I don't even remember which ones are in the book and not the book. I do have the book here, so I do know to an extent. But it's not like I have this running tab of like,
too.
These are the 51 lessons. But I know at points, sometimes I like it when I twist the knife in different things that I post. But I know that I posted something about not apologizing to other people. And people are like, you're a savage. You don't apologize to others. And I'm like, it's not that I don't say I'm sorry, but anytime that I'm saying I'm sorry, I should also be saying that I'm wrong and potentially why. And I know that was a lesson at some point. A lot of my lessons boiled down to like forgiveness related stuff, because especially for people in recovery, but I think just for people in general, forgiveness is probably like, or I would say lack of forgiveness, holding anger, holding resentment is probably one of the biggest things that affects people in general.
I agree.
That leads alcoholics and addicts to not be able to stop drinking. It was also the basis of my eating disorders, which I talk about in the book, that it was boiling down to this just like lack of forgiveness. And it's not as though I was walking around like grumbling all the time, thinking that I was holding all of these grudges. And I think when people think of like, oh, well, I'm not an angry person, they're thinking about that.
Not
Like,
the
am I
same.
walking around with a chip on my shoulder, angry about the world? And I definitely wasn't. But it's like when I really got down to it, it's like I was actually pretty angry about my parents' divorce because I was confused about it. And that's one of like the biggest lessons I've learned, is that when you get confused, you eventually end up angry. Like if you let confusion simmer long enough, it turns into anger. And one of the easy examples I always give is think about the last thing you lost. Like if you lost your car keys, for the first like few seconds, you're confused, but how quickly you're like,
Where are they? Yes.
and it turns into this anger. And the same thing happens with things in our lives, especially in childhood, that anything that confused me, like, why do my parents not love each other anymore? Why did I had a friend who was murdered in 5th grade? Why was he murdered? Those things I was just confused about. I don't even think I was like angry at first as much. I just didn't understand. But slowly that just turned into like huge amounts of suppressed anger that started coming out in all these different ways. And then I'll add one more layer, but like that it doesn't have to be things that people necessarily did to me. I always say like resentment, fancied or real. So the things I've been talking about are like real resentment, right? I like really was upset that my parents died. I really was upset that my friend got murdered eventually. But I also had this resentment that I like needed to be perfect, needed to get good grades, or my parents wouldn't love me. And there's no truth to that, right? In my head, I just created this story that I started living by, that actually the basis of that story is anger. I did the same thing with body weight, that like I needed to be skinny or this or that would happen. And the basis of that story is anger. And now I've got eating disorders and I'm obsessed with my body weight and I'm trying to get all A's and there's too much pressure. So I just start drinking all the time, right? And things just explode. And the basis of all of that is anger. And the basis of relief from all of that was forgiveness.
I love that you brought up this and forgiveness and bitterness and releasing it. There's 2 or 3 people in my life recently, 3, that they've come to me with this business issue. And each one of them I have said, okay, so now that you've solved the problem, you're not going to like the next part. They're like, what? And not all of my clients love the Bible aspect of it. So I meet them where they are. They're like, I need you to forgive them. And they're like, what are you talking about? Like they stole my product. They marketed my thing. And I'm like, yep. And the only person that's going to hurt for you not forgiving them is you. And so it's the next step. And thankfully, they all have jumped in and are going down that road. But it is significant to your cellular structure. I mean, literally talking about the nervous system, what happens to your body if you hold bitterness and unforgiveness. And the Bible talks about it. Like it will fester and wound you in ways we don't want.
Yeah. It'd make you an alcoholic and anorexic. You want it.
And then I started thinking when you were talking about that those are identity issues. I don't know who I am if my parents aren't married. I can now call myself an alcoholic. I can call myself this. Like all of it is like identity related, where I'm going to adopt this other identity because I don't either like or understand this one over here. And that's the devil's playground because there's no confusion in Christ.
The healing that comes from letting that stuff go. And I was going to say the healing from when people can telling their story. There's this story, it's actually from my husband. Most of the lessons of the 52 lessons are lessons that I tell via like stories and experiences of my life, or sometimes the life of close others with permission. And I think this one's in here, but my husband, when he got his last DUI before he got sober, so this is like Thanksgiving 1999, he ends up getting court ordered to something called a MAD panel, which is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, where you basically, like, normally what they're kind of like, without like demonizing them, but they're not forgiveness panels, right? They are panels where you, as the drunk driver, go and listen to mothers who have had their kids taken away by a drunk driver. They don't have legs anymore because of a drunk driver, right? It's like you sit there and
So
you're
it's a
basically
punishment.
like,
You're sitting there
yeah.
to sort of
So
be
it's
punished.
part of your punishment is like basically listening to how people have been hurt by people drunk driving because they don't know about that forgiveness would actually help people, right? And they think that they're scaring you out of drunk driving again. And especially if someone doesn't have like a real addiction, I'm sure it does actually scare them out of drunk driving again because they have some control over that. But what was so interesting is the one that my husband was assigned to. He's sitting in this little audience of other DUI people like himself. And then on the stage, what looks like a family comes out. So like a mom, a dad, and a son come out and they start telling, the mom and dad start telling the story about they had a 16-year-old daughter and like parents' worst nightmare, right? Two police come to their door, knock on it. Like their daughter was out with friends. They opened the door and they said like they knew right away that something bad had happened. And then the police end up telling them that a guy had basically like hit their daughter head on. He was drinking. She died instantly at the scene. And the dad was like at the door mainly, and the mom was listening from the top of the stairs. And she like had slowly started coming down as the cops are telling the story. And then she gets to the bottom of the stairs and she's like, "What are you doing about him?" And they're like, "He's in jail, ma'am. Like he's gonna get the highest sentence, whatever." And she's like, "What is his bail?" And they're like, it's not set yet. Court takes longer than that, but like, I promise it'll be really high, whatever. And she was like, "No, what is his bail?" And she basically ends up in that moment, God just put it on her heart to like bail him out, let him live with you in the daughter's room because he was like homeless, like a troubled youth, essentially. He didn't have anywhere to stay. He's drinking, whatever, on the condition that he doesn't drink, he doesn't use drugs, he doesn't whatever. And it was this, the mom and the dad talked about this dichotomy of like, mom had come to this profound place of grace and forgiveness. Dad wanted to effing kill the guy who killed his daughter, but the guy is living in his house. And the wife is the one who invited him to live into his house. And it talked about the grace of forgiveness. And then the dad talked about working through getting to the place of forgiveness that his wife had modeled for him. And the son on the stage was the guy. And they're now like a family and they travel together and talk about sometimes these MAD panels, but they also have a ministry around forgiveness of just like major accidents and things that happen to people.
I have full body chills. That is so God. Nobody would do that from their practical worldly view.
No, you're supposed to be mad. It's justified that you could be mad. That's why forgiveness is so cool, is because then just by me hearing that story 20 years later, me putting the story in my book, me telling you, it's a level of forgiveness that I think sometimes we put caps on like what's allowed to be forgiven, what's allowed to really totally be let go. And that's like one of the highest bars of totally
that
letting
probably
someone go.
healed the dad's, what would have destroyed him in anger and bitterness. Her act of grace and mercy and listening to the Holy Spirit guide probably saved him from a disastrous life.
Yeah. She was stressing. There is nothing special about me. I just turned to God in that moment. So like we all have that ability to forgive. We just have to be able to actually tap into that ability to forgive. So in business and whatever, if someone purposely does something, if someone accidentally does something, it's like, can I get to this place of like, okay, if that mom can forgive that, I can forgive whatever
Stealing
this
my
is.
formula for my products. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so much of business is rooted in competition that we don't immediately go to grace and mercy and forgiveness. And that's what I want to change, is the belief that you can have a robust, successful, prosperous business without being cutthroat and competitive. Because what ultimately happens when you use that competitive mindset and the external, whether you're talking about market share or customers in your industry, you got to make sure you beat the competition, is if you're going to try to outwardly do that, by nature, you're going to inwardly do that with your employees and the people that you work with. It's very unusual that you would take a paradigm and a belief in one part of the business and it not infiltrate the other, which is why a lot of cultures you'll see that are highly regulated cultures for medicine, pharmaceutical, things that have to have a lot of rigor. And you'll find that same kind of rigor inside the organization where there's lots of controls about the people and lots of that. It starts to be how you see it. We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And so however we see it externally with customers, we start to believe that on the inside too.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense if I just look at my life and how it's gone over time. And especially when I don't even realize the things that I'm in, right? Like the first step of even beginning to look at things differently is even realizing that I'm looking at things in a certain way because I'm so used to looking at them that I don't even know that I'm looking at them.
Which made sense to me when you were talking about the patterns of confusion, because our brains believe that same equals safe, homeostasis. And so if something has dysregulation in there, the confusion about the divorce, the confusion about these beliefs, then it overstimulates your brain trying to satisfy the confusion, which is what gets you angry because you're like, this is overstimulating me. Now I'm angry because I couldn't satisfy that in my own pattern and brain.
Yeah.
We are a weird, fascinating set of cells that God created. And that's the other thing I love is it's not separate. God created our nervous systems. And if you look at the way the nervous system is designed, you can go to the Bible and find it validated like a gazillion ways. Like, separate.
Yeah. No, definitely not. It's all related.
It's all related. Okay. So I want to keep this conversation going. You've got new stuff coming out. You've got new things that you're doing in addition to this job thing that's going to be happening. How can we stay in touch with you? So somebody's listening today, they're like, oh my gosh, I love her. Instagram, what is it? It's Dr. Lisa Stanton.
Yeah.
Right?
I always say the easiest place is actually my website is just drlisastanton.com.
Okay.
And then you can get to Instagram, you can get to Substack, you can get to events, you can get to everything. Podcasts, like I have a little list of podcasts I've been on. So the link to this will be right there too. So drlisastanton.com is the easiest. And then, Dr. Lisa Stanton on Instagram and Substack. And I have like 3 videos on TikTok. I'm too old. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not built for it. Either way, if you find me there, don't expect much from that. I like go back and forth about deleting it all the time because I'm so bad at it that I almost am just like, why have it?
I get it. I just post the little clips from all the interviews. They automatically post to TikTok, but every once in a while, I'll just throw something random out there. My son's stuff is out there on my page sometimes, but it's not where I hope people form their opinions about me. For sure. So find me there. If you find you there, then jump over to Instagram. I'm sure they're linked, right? And see the real you. That's where I found you. And so what's the next project other than figuring out about this new job that you're starting? Is there already a book in the works, a second book in the works?
I have a second book written already.
Oh, hello.
So we'll just see. I've talked to many other people in the traditional publishing world. I don't have a clue how many books I sold because they only have to tell me once a quarter. People are like, how's it doing? I'm like,
I don't know. I don't know either.
So we'll see how all of it goes. There is a second book written. I mean, like the people that already like me have requested it. But of course, I'm like, are those 1,000 people like telling 10,000 other people and then there'll be another book? Or are those just like the fans that I got? And then who knows? God knows. I don't know.
Yeah.
But there's a second book already written and I feel like it's going to come out in some way or another. I'm just not really sure what the plan for that is, but I feel like it's just been this ongoing, like I just started a Substack like 4 months ago and that's been cool because it's directly emailed to people. Whereas I feel like people can kind of miss things on social just because there's the algorithms put stuff out randomly. I feel like I'm almost spending more time on Substack than Instagram now. So
that just confirmed a prayer that I had this morning because people keep following me on Substack, but I haven't been putting anything out. And I was like, Lord, do you want me to start writing on Substack? Like, why do I keep getting these messages about Substack? Like, is this a real thing? Should I start doing that instead of some of the stuff I'm doing on social? Like, just make it clear. And then you just brought it up again. I'm like,
people are a lot nicer there too, if that makes a difference to you.
Yes. I've gotten to the point where it's like, I'm probably going to make some people mad and I'm okay with that too. But yeah. And I
just feel like
love to write. So that's,
Oh yeah, you should. I feel like though the mad people are like not as mean.
they're less mad.
Or they're just because it's like a longer form medium, people tend to like write you a paragraph when they're mad. So at least you have the context and not just like, this is stupid. And you're like, my outfit, what I said, my face, like,
I love that they're less mad and they're going to give you a full paragraph on why they're mad. So you have the context of why they're mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm in. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Which sometimes is actually great for creativity when someone like, this is stupid, doesn't help me like think harder about another article that I should write.
Yeah.
But when someone really has a thing where they're like, hey, these are the parts of this, like actually an example is from the book. One of the things is basically like another day of sobriety shouldn't be your goal. And people are just like, you should say that because people are going to, and I'm like, my point is aim toward Jesus and sobriety will come. Don't aim towards sobriety because if you're aiming towards sobriety, you can like chew nicotine gum in your bed and not get out of bed for a full day. And like, you got another day sober, but you haven't actually like gotten anywhere closer to heaven or God or anything. But like, instead of people just like looking at the title on the screen, not even reading what I actually said and saying, this is stupid. If someone has a critique, it'll be a whole paragraph that then I can be like, oh, well, maybe there's a longer form way for me to explain the thought that I'm having where I can actually reach more people instead of just being like, that person's having a bad day.
Yeah. No, that's good. I love that idea. And I'm always talking about context. That's what's missing from social media is there's zero context about anybody's life. Just judgment and opinions.
Yeah.
I want you to come back and tell us how the job's going. So
amazing.
Just put a note on your calendar. In 6 months, we're going to do a job review and see how things are going.
Where's she at? Or was this a 6-week plan and I'm
Or was it
somewhere
a 6-week
else?
assignment? Who knows? Keep us posted.
Yeah.
Thank you for jumping on. I reached out on Instagram and we didn't know each other at all. And I just said, I love this whole surrender thing that you're doing. Come talk about it. And you did. And I appreciate it.
Amazing. It's been so great to meet you.
You too. All right. Well, we're friends now. So let's stay in touch.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
I'm not coming down. I never left it on the ground. I'm not coming down.
Thanks for being here. You can follow us on Instagram, Business is Human, or TikTok, Rebecca Fleetwood Hession. It's a great way to share some of the clips with your colleagues and friends. All right. Make it a great day. Love you, mean it.